Hey everyone, as it's World Mental Health Day today, I want to come on and record an episode just to share my own personal experience with mental health challenges. And the theme this year is really about workplace wellness and mental health in the workplace, and how workplaces can support their individuals to create better environments and that have a positive impact on the team, their individuals, and the communities that they're living and working within. It's something I feel really passionately about. I think it's so important that we share our stories and that we're vulnerable, not just on days like today, but it's always a really good reminder for us to focus in on these things. So I'm going to share my journey, particularly within the workplace, but also things that were good, things that were challenging, things that I wish had been different. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of everything I was dealing with, but I think it's really important to share these stories, help other people feel not alone, less alone. I know I definitely felt very alone when I was going through some of my challenges. I do have a special guest today, the one and only Apollo. Doesn't very often get let in the office because he's too yappy. But as he is a big part of my mental health support team, he is here with me today. So I guess without, going back to throughout my whole life history, I have struggled with mental health for a large portion of my life. I've had real moments of just utter sadness that I wasn't able to articulate, real low motivation, and just generally struggled quite a lot with maybe some dark thoughts and about who I was. I really struggled to see positive things about myself. And I initially put a lot of that down to coming to terms with my identity and being gay. And that was something I'd struggled with quite a lot. And I associated a lot of it with that. But, I went on into my 20s and still was going through these phases. And actually, the first moment I had was nothing to do with any leaders in my business, but a colleague actually was a person who was really supportive to me at that time. She really encouraged me to go and see a doctor and try and get some support, which for me felt, quite overwhelming at the time. And I did that. It didn't work out great for me in that time. This obviously was many, many years ago. Things have moved on greatly. But at that time, there was part of me that felt relieved that I'd communicated it to some professionals. But in terms of how it helped me move along, there wasn't much that came out of it. So I've always found ways to cope myself. Anyone who's followed me for a little while will know being out in nature and being around animals is a huge thing for me. I know if I'm starting to feel down or I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, I need to get away from my desk. I need to be outside. I've always liked hiking until, my knees have got very old and granny-like, but there's something about being stood on top of a mountain or in the middle of a field that just puts things back into perspective for you, where it's not about saying what you're feeling isn't meaningful, because it is, and it's very meaningful to you, especially in that moment. But I think just being able to step out of it and see, for me, like, I'm just a bit obsessed with beauty in the world and finding joy in the world. So looking at a beautiful view from the top of a mountain for me is really powerful. It gives me a reason to drive on. Or just being out in nature, there's so many beautiful things in the world, and being able to go out and be part of that, for me personally, works really well. So anyway, back to some of the workplace challenges. So I guess I had two pretty big incidents where I really struggled. I ended up signed off, etc., etc. So the first one was really my first role in the corporate world. So prior to this, I'd spent a lot of my career either playing hockey, outdoor anyways, or I worked in criminal law for a long time, but I worked very much 9 to 5. I did that to pay for hockey. I had lower levels of stress at that point. But I'd been doing well in this role. I'd been progressing. I was taking on more and more responsibility. We were in an environment that was really intense in that we had a lot of stakeholders from across. This was a very big organization, financial services. What we had delivered was good. So we now had stakeholders from across the organization. All of the different product lines wanted a piece of what we were doing. So we would have our daily steerco meeting, where every day we would go and sit in a meeting room where our 8 to 10 very senior stakeholders from across the business would tell us how disappointed they were with us because we were not able to deliver the things they wanted, because it was just not feasible. And we would go through this cycle day after day, week after week, month after month. And it was tough. And I would get quite anxious about those meetings, because I'm not very good at feeling like I'm not doing a great job. And even though we were doing a good job, we were delivering awesome stuff, which was why everyone wanted a piece of us. Actually, the ask of us was just completely unrealistic and impossible. There was no way we were going to be able to deliver all the things all of those communities wanted within the timeframes we had, with the people we had, with the technology challenges we had. It was not real world. So the group of us that used to go, I was there with some quite senior members of our function. There was a sense of us being in it together, which was good. We acknowledged that what was happening was a bit crazy, but how we were going to get through it together. But I think some of the challenges for me was this constant feeling like we were never doing enough. We were never good enough. We were, not satisfying our stakeholders. Things like this, for me, I find personally very difficult. I did, and I still do, don't get me wrong, but I found ways to deal with that and rationalize things better. But then for me as well, a big thing has always been about protecting my team, giving my team a voice, and being able to balance those two things I found really difficult, particularly early in my career, where I wasn't necessarily getting loads of guidance on how to do that effectively. We talked a lot about stakeholder management, but we didn't talk much about how we protected our teams. And actually, this was the big driver for me in the end of leaving that business, was going in every day and feeling like no matter what I did, it would not make things better for my team. I was like, why am I doing this? This is not good for me. But before that, I think actually I was being seen to be doing a good job, even though I didn't feel it myself. But actually what that resulted in was me being given more work, me being given more responsibility. It got to a point where my boss had asked me to sit down with another member of our team who was 2 grades above me at this point, to prep her for our stakeholder meetings every day. I needed to know what she was going to communicate, because it was something that I happened to be quite good at. But I was like, why am I now having to address this with someone in your team that you're worried about what she's going to say? Like, that's your job. You go and deal with it. I can say that now, but at the time I was like, oh, sure, yeah, it's great. He trusts me. I'm going to go and do this. So there was a number of things like that where I was just being given more, asked to do more, that was work of people that were multiple grades above me. They were being paid 20, 30 grand more than me a year. And although that's not the focus, when I reflect on it, I'm like, guys, what the fuck, But honestly, it just got to a point where my anxiety every day was just so high. And I'm not an anxious person. I don't think I'm a particularly anxious person. I get sad and I worry, but I'm not a massively anxious person. But I would get to a point, like, as soon as I pulled into the car park, I would just feel utterly overwhelmed. I was going into work even earlier. I was working later on this treadmill that was just impossible. I was never going to catch up. Our team were global, so I would log off at the end of the day and India would be online. I'd be responding to emails when I got home because I wanted the India team to feel supported. And then I'd come back in. Our UK team were back online. We had a team in Texas. We had teams in Lithuania. It was just non-stop. I was never, ever going to be able to do everything that I wanted to do and have the impact that I felt I needed to have. And no one was saying to me, Claire, that's not possible. Nobody can do that. It's completely irrational. This is really what we expect of you. This is what good would look like. It was just, yeah, keep going. Yeah, oh, and have you done that? Have you thought about this? And can you speak to that person? But honestly, it just got to a point where I couldn't do it anymore, physically couldn't do it. And I remember being at home with my wife, and she obviously had identified that I was shifting in my home life, because let's remember, when we're going through this stuff at work, it's not just our work life that's impacted ever. It is every aspect of our life that's impacted. And she'll probably kill me for saying this. Hopefully she doesn't listen to this episode. But I remember us having an argument on the stairs and her saying to me, Claire, you're supposed to be the rational one in our relationship. And it just was a bit of a reality check for me. Not that I should have to be rational all the time, but actually my ability to cope and be rational is normally much higher than it was in that moment, or that period. It definitely wasn't a moment. It was months and months we're talking. but it did just make me realize I'm becoming a different person at home. I'm not able to have the conversations that we would normally have, or be the person that I wanted to be in our relationship. And yes, I'm irrational sometimes, but the vast majority of the time I am really rational and I can calm a situation down. And I just was not able to do that. I was just going back into things harder. I would be really defensive. I was just angry and sad all of the time. God, I feel a bit emotional talking about it now because I remember it's all bubbling back up. But that complete sense of feeling so out of control of my emotions was scary. And I remember the final point was I was sat in the office. I was in a meeting with this woman who I'd been asked to support. There was a few of us, and we were sat on a sofa, and I'd made a few comments about something we were talking about, something that I knew from my team that was going to have an impact on the thing we were talking about, and it was just ignored or, shut down. And I just remember zoning out. I remember almost feeling like the sofa was sucking me in. I just kind of was falling back into the sofa. I wanted to remove myself from that situation. I didn't want to be part of I just basically wanted to be invisible. I didn't want to be there anymore. And my focus became, don't cry. Don't cry in front of this group. Just hold your stuff together, wait for the meeting to finish. And I just sat there silent, waiting for it to be over so I could remove myself from that situation. And I remember getting up and walking straight to one of the offices that the senior leadership team would use, where my boss normally would be located. But he wasn't in that day, but another senior leader who I had a very good relationship was there. And I walked in and I just burst into tears. And I laugh now because I remember the sheer panic coming across his face of like, oh my gosh, what has happened? And I remember struggling to get out and just said, I can't do it anymore. I can't do this. And he was amazing. He just basically said to me, what do you need? What can I do? How can I help? And I was like, I just need to get out of here. And he was like, get your bag, go home. Don't worry about anything else. I'll deal with it. Just get your bag and go home. And I remember just walking from that room, grabbing my bag and leaving, trying not to make any eye contact with anyone in our very open plan office. Bear in mind, anyone who knows me, I'm very chatty and fluffy and lovely in the office. I'm definitely someone who'll say hi to everyone and make conversation. And if you're unlucky, you'll end up with a hug off me. But so I literally had to just look at the floor, not make eye contact with anyone and get myself out of there. And then I went on to be signed off with stress, they called it. Whether it was that or not, I don't know. Whatever you want to call it, it didn't feel great. And yeah, it took me a long time. I convinced myself during that period I was going to become a carpenter, work outside, work with wood. I built a load of projects at home out of like any scrap wood I could find. I laugh again now, but I still know it still resonates with me because I'm like, yeah, being outdoors, being with nature, making something new out of nature, like all of that stuff, yeah, still resonates with me. But carpentry probably wasn't my future, although my granddad was one, so maybe I should have done that. And I took a lot of time for myself. This is also around the time we got this guy, hey, who has been an unbelievable help for my mental health. And just being around him is so calming, except for when he's on yappy mode. But, the pressure to go outside, go for a walk, do those things. But I guess when I reflect on actually what the workplace could have done differently, although that senior leader was amazing for me in the moment, when I returned to work, we had a number of return to work meetings where I had some really good conversations with my boss, like out in a field, actually. They put me on a different project that was slightly lower pressured at that time. But actually it was kind of in a wheelhouse with people that trusted me already. The stakeholders already knew me. They trusted me. They'd seen some of my work and they like how I work with stakeholders. And it definitely was better for me when I returned. But really there was so much that I was like, this isn't what I want my life to be. And I went through a classic, I resigned, took another job. They then offered me the role that was at the same level as person I've been supported. But for me, by that point, it was done. I was like, decision made, I'm out. But actually, a lot of the things that would have been helpful for me was like acknowledging what we were doing was absolutely insane, setting an expectation of what good would be for us. Like how, like we're not about not pushing the boundaries. So I'm a big believer, like we should always be pushing ourselves, but like where in that, if we miss the moon, where amongst the stars is a good place for us? Like being collectively honest about that, I think is really important. That can still be a stretch, right? But I think that collective, we know this is difficult, understanding that some of our stakeholders' situations are just going to be a challenge, but that feeling of being in it together, something you'll hear me talk about loads, but that feeling of being in it together and then not putting more work on me when I'm already struggling, not expecting me to manage people in your team because you've got concerns about their ability to have certain conversations with stakeholders. Like, that's your job to coach them, or give me a role where it's my job to coach them. There was a lot of different things that built up to create that environment where I just felt unable to cope. And actually, although they were very supportive when I eventually had a meltdown, as I will refer to it, there were so many things that could have been done prior to me reaching that point that actually would have prevented that from happening and enabled me to not go through this phase of having to be out of work and rebuilding myself. And it had a big impact on my confidence. I felt like I'm not good enough. I felt like I can't cope in these high pressure situations where people just go all the time. But I tell you what, when I returned to that work, a guy I'd been working with had a heart attack, and another guy I'd been working with had a heart attack, and then another guy who I hadn't been working with but worked within the same function had a heart attack and died. And then the company rolled out teaching everyone how to do CPR across a bit. That was their solution, was to teach everyone how to do CPR, which, great, good skill to have. But how about we prevent getting to that point in the first place? There's a reason these people are dying at their desks or having heart attacks at their desks, or, it's just not a world. This is not what life is about and what the world was created for. So I guess I'll really quickly touch on the second incident I had, which was actually much later. By the way, I left that business. I went on to another role that I actually felt a lot more resilient at, in terms of I'd learned these skills where I needed to set some boundaries. I knew kind of what the triggers were for me. I could identify if I thought I was falling into one of these not great places again. So that felt quite empowering for me. But I went to another company. It was actually one of my first senior, well, I was a head of, I wasn't part of the leadership team, but I was part of a leadership team. And it was my first time in that position. It was the first time I had a head of role. I had a team of 18 people. And there was a number of incidents that happened there, actually. And one of the first things, like, you can talk about this stuff in reflection, but one of the big challenges was we had a really dysfunctional leadership team. And at the time, I knew stuff wasn't right. I'd been talking to a few people about my concerns, but some of the stress came from the leadership team I was working with. So, head of product, myself, a couple of other people. Our leaders were talking to us about different things, which caused us challenges day to day. They had different priorities, had different focuses, and they weren't interested in getting into the detail that we were trying to describe some in terms of panic. Yes, there's loads, self-reflection, loads we could have done from a stakeholder management perspective. But one of the big challenges there was just this misalignment amongst our leadership teams. And then the other thing was, I think we all probably have been in this situation where you're being asked to do something you don't want to do. And I think, or you don't believe in. And I think, particularly with a team, this is even harder, right? I had to convince my team that we just had to do this thing. And actually, there was so many conversations where we'd gone back and forth and we'd challenged and we'd put forward our concerns. And it got to a point where it's just like, you've just got to do it. Not a fan, but my reaction to that was, actually, do you know what? Okay, fine. I'm going to be in it with my team. We had to work late every night. I was like, there's no way I'm asking them to work late if I'm not going to be in the office. None of our senior leaders were there, just FYI. But I'd be in the office with them every night. They had to work late. I would order them food, all the cheesy stuff. But it was really important to me that they felt like I was there with them and I wasn't asking them to do something that I wouldn't do myself. But obviously that created me stress in that I feel like I'm forcing my team to do something that I fundamentally don't believe in and they fundamentally don't believe in. And I can't help break that cycle. And I've always put, a lot of that on myself, and something I've worked on a lot and continue to work on. But it makes me think about how much of ourselves are wrapped up in our work identity and how we see what good is. We focus so much on who we are as a person, but actually we are a person outside of work. And there's so much good stuff about who we are that we should be able to bring to the workplace. And that should define our leadership styles and how we operate and the environments in which we thrive, not trying to force ourselves into a different shaped hole because we feel like we have to. There's so much I could go into on that, but we'll pause that for now. But basically in this scenario, I ended up a bit of, again, a build up. This is stuff never happens overnight. It's months and months of things happening. And I do think part of it was not work related. I, as I mentioned earlier, have always had moments of feeling very sad, feeling very down. But there was a lot happening in the workplace where I was having to be quite confrontational, which is something that doesn't sit naturally. So dealing with confrontation is something that I've, continued to work on, still work on to this day. But in that moment, I was really struggling to have the conversations that I needed to. I felt I didn't trust myself to have a conversation without starting crying if I needed to challenge somebody. And it made me feel that people wouldn't respect me. They wouldn't value my opinion. They wouldn't take me seriously, which is all stuff I then internalized and made the situation feel even worse. And the pressure to feel like I needed to speak up, but I didn't. And then knowing that I hadn't spoken up would also, make me reflect negatively on myself. I hadn't done what I could within my power to help the team. So there was a lot happening in that moment. Those moments that I was really struggling with. But the way this all fundamentally showed up for me was I could not stop crying. I couldn't stop crying. I would be sat at my desk, I'd start crying. I would have to leave and go to the toilets. I'd have to go outside and go for a walk. I'd avoid, as I said, having the conversations that I needed to. I might be sat at my desk and an email would come in, and it might have been something that on an average day I could just deal with. But in this moment, it would tip me over the edge, or, just a slight different tone in someone's voice, or, anything could tip me. And I just didn't have confidence in my emotions, in myself, to be able to deal with what I needed to. And it was clear I wasn't okay. I hadn't told anybody that I was crying all the time. I was hiding this from my team. I was hiding it from my manager. I didn't feel like it was something I could speak to my manager about. He was part of what was maybe adding to some of the challenge. And don't get me wrong, definitely not all his fault. There was a lot I learned from him as well. A lot of really good stuff I learned from him. But just in that moment, I didn't feel like I would be taken seriously. And that's hard thing to feel as well. I did eventually. I was in a meeting with our chief people officer and again, burst into tears because that's what I did at that time. And she was great with me. She, helped me think about what was going to help myself. And she didn't take anything personal herself. She set really clear boundaries, but just nudged me in the right direction to go and get the support that I needed. And actually the thing that worked for me in that moment was I went on sertraline back in 2017. I had personally fought against that for a really long time in my life for personal reasons. I didn't want to go on medication. I'd done counseling on and off over the years. I probably never really found the right person for me. But sertraline really helped me, and personally it's not right for everybody, but for me it took the edge off those emotions. It enabled me to regulate. It stopped the need to cry every 5 minutes, which is what I needed in that moment, to just be able to pause and reflect on what was happening. And obviously it doesn't solve all your problems, but it just gave me the headspace to be able to think about what I needed to do next for myself. And personally that was an absolute game changer for me. But I also think it's so important as individuals, as people who have had journeys, to share, to speak up. Like, I know I said this at the start, this is a great day that we have to recognize, and it encourages people. It's a good reminder, but don't wait for this day or, Mental Health Awareness Week in May. Talk about this when you feel comfortable and you can. I think it's so important we share our stories and we share our vulnerabilities, because you can guarantee everyone on this planet has gone through something. And the hardest thing in that period is you feel so alone and so isolated. And a lot of it is self-talk. It's what we're telling ourselves, but you feel like you're the only person who's ever felt this way and you can't see a way out. And that's really scary. So being able to talk it through with people who have been there, sharing your own experience of you've been in that point and you've come out the other side, I just think it's so important. And I wasn't seeing enough of that myself when I was in those positions, particularly the first time it happened. We weren't talking about mental health the way we do today, which is why I'm so passionate about sharing these stories. And yes, look, there's a lot that's happened for me since then as well. But, fundamentally since 2017, I've been in such a better place personally. I have learned the things about myself that help me, like we've talked about going out in nature. So where I live now is in the countryside, because that brings me joy on good days and bad days. I know I just need to go out for a walk and be in the fresh air or the rain even, and being around nature and all those things that are beautiful. It just brings me joy. So I think knowing these things about yourself are really important, that when you feel these things building up or these moments building up, you can go and be proactive about getting yourself in the spaces that help you. Being with the dog who's now curled up on the floor also helps me. Some nights I just need to not speak to anyone and sit with the dog, and that's totally cool. It's fine, right? I know that about myself. It helps me recharge and get back into a good place for the next day. Life is hard. There's always going to be moments that challenge us and push us, and we need to know, one, for ourselves, what helps us and what's within our control to do things about. We also need to be able to recognize when we need to go and get support and speak to people, speak to professionals that can help us. I'm a massive believer in therapy, by the way. I think everyone should do it all of the time. If you're going to the gym, if you're going out exercising, if you're eating healthily, you're doing all the things to look after your body, but therapy, do it. Don't wait until you're in the depths. Do it. It's a maintenance thing in the same way as all that other stuff is. So 100% advocate for therapy and just talking things through. Do the things that help you. But as businesses, I think it's also really, really important, and as leaders, that it's all these micro moments that build up. There's never one big event that just tips somebody over the edge or pushes them to a point where they're, not in a good place. And it might not even be work that's, triggered this thing. For me, I feel like sadness is ingrained in me, and as well as joy, don't get me wrong, I have the real extremes and I've had to find ways to manage that. But there's definitely been things in the workplace that has pushed me into a place where I cannot deal and regulate with myself, in a way that I normally would. So it is all those micro moments. It is the times we just ask people to take on more and more and more, and we're not checking in with them. It's the moments that people feel in these high stress situations on their own. It is the little moments where people are feeling a bit overwhelmed, or they've got a lot going on in their personal life as well as at work, and they don't know how to balance that. There's all these so many moments, and we can help people. We can help in so many ways by acknowledging this stuff, having the right conversations with our teams, creating safe spaces where people can tell you when they're struggling with stuff. But just be reflective, pause, think about what you need as an individual, think about what you can do as a leader to help your team, and just keep being kind. My ending message is just keep being kind. Thank you.